Well, good evening, folks. Thanks for joining us. I think we might have a small group this evening, but we do appreciate you joining us for this information and comment session. So it's going to be our last one for the draft MiEJScreen tool, at least when it comes to putting official comments on the records. We are going to still be doing a office hour next Monday, which would just be another opportunity to ask questions, but not necessarily put comments on the record. So like I said, we're probably going to have a pretty small group this evening. We did have another session this afternoon, which we had a pretty good group of folks asking questions and making comments. So hopefully we can get you through this one pretty easily. Just really quickly before we get started here, we're going to give you a little bit of background information to start off with, but the first thing I want to do is just really quickly introduce who is on tonight. So I'm Jennifer Dixon, and I'm with EGLE's Environmental Support Division. I'm our air quality liaison. And then I have Regina Strong. She's our environmental justice public advocate. Katie Lambeth is the environmental justice and tribal liaison. And then John Esch is our geologist extraordinaire / senior geologist, geology specialist. That's what the technical term is. So we've got a crew for you on today just to talk through some things. So we're going to do, like I said, some background information. We'll probably go through that pretty quickly. We're going to do a little bit of a presentation on the scoring matrix and some other information about the draft screening tool itself. And then we'll do a short presentation, which is like a demonstration on how to use the tool, which hopefully will either spur some questions, maybe some comments on things. And then we're going to actually combine our question and answer and comment session. So one of the things we were talking about is just the inclusivity of this tool. We want to make sure that all the questions, all the answers, all the comments get included in the report out and any potential changes that we make to the draft tool. So we thought that'd be a little bit easier way to do it. So that being said, obviously we just got started and we're scheduled to go up to 7:30, but if for some reason you guys are running out of questions, totally fine. Running out of comments, also totally fine. Before 7:30, we'll let you get off a little bit early and maybe go get some dinner or enjoy the sun, which I know it's freezing outside, but at least the sun's out today. So I'm completely appreciating that. We will close off things today, just reminding you how to provide comments going forward. The comment period does end on May 16th. So there's plenty of time even after today to provide us with comments. Just remind you how to get more information and then also give you some information on how to contact us if you have questions going forward. So just a little bit of a reminder that your lines will be muted during the presentation portion today, but you can feel free to type questions in at any time. So just use that question box at the bottom of your screen. We are going to be recording this meeting. So this meeting, along with the one we did earlier today and the two that we did on March 29th will be posted on EGLE's YouTube channel and also at michigan.gov/environmental justice. So we will be putting those on there for folks to look at later if that's helpful. So I already mentioned the question and answer box. Like I said, please feel free as we go through to get your questions in there. You don't necessarily have to wait until John stops with the presentation or the demonstration of the tool to get those in there. If we do have folks calling in, which we don't now, but if we do end up having some folks call in, and I'll remind folks later, that's just #2 on your phone to raise your hand, and then you'll be able to verbalize questions. Those of you that are participating online with us, just use that raise hand icon if you really feel strongly about either verbalizing a question or making a comment verbally. So that being said, Regina, I am going to have you start your part of the presentation. Katie, if you want to go ahead and share your screen, and then whenever we're ready there, Regina can get started. Yep, there you go. Looks good.
Well, thank you so much, Jennifer. Good afternoon, everyone. Wanted to get started. I'm Regina Strong, the Environmental Justice Public Advocate. And just wanted to give you a little background on our office and the steps we've taken to get us to the point where we are now with the MiEJScreen. So first, I'll say that our Office of the Environmental Justice Public Advocate was created by executive order of Governor Whitmer in 2019 as a Type 1 agency that sits in EGLE, but also works with the governor's office. I'll show you a little more about that in a second. The role of the environmental justice public advocate in our office is to address environmental justice concerns, complaints, also elevate environmental justice and work toward achieving environmental justice for the state. At the same time, and in the same executive order that created our office, there was also the establishment of the Interagency Environmental Justice Response Team. And that response team is made up of representation from several state departments, very much focused on environmental justice, how we not only work on it through EGLE or the Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy, but also incorporating environmental justice work across state government. So this is the structure that I was talking about. Our office sits in the middle there, right kind of with a connection to the executive office of EGLE, which is where we sit, as well as the governor's office. Then we also have the Interagency Environmental Justice Response Team, as well as the Michigan Advisory Council on Environmental Justice, and I'll tell you more about that in a moment. The Interagency Environmental Justice Response Team has 4 work groups made up of participants from across state government, and they are the Communications and Outreach Work Group, Planning and Policy, Training, and Research and Data. And why Research and Data is so critically important to this conversation is that is the work group that began working on the development of the MiEJScreen tool. This is a picture from the first and only in-person meeting of the Michigan Advisory Council on Environmental Justice, or as I affectionately like to call it, the MIEJ. As you can see, it is a very diverse advisory council made up of frontline community members, environmental justice advocates and organizations, as well as environmental organization representation, local government, business and industry, labor and academia, as well as tribal representation. So there's a broad range of folks who are part of this advisory council advising us on moving forward with environmental justice. In this picture, you'll also see department heads who were part of that initial meeting, as well as the lieutenant governor. So one of the things that we did early on in both the response team as well as the MIEJ was look at how our state officially defined environmental justice, because what we had previously used was the EPA's definition. And so we took that as the base and really thought about what we needed to add or change or adjust for our work here in the state. And this is the definition, which I'll read to you. Environmental justice is the equitable treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, ability, or income, and is critical to the development and application of laws, regulations, and policies that affect the environment, as well as the places people live, work, play, and worship. So when we talk about equitable treatment, what we're really saying is no group of people should bear a disproportionate share of the negative consequences resulting from our governmental, industrial, or commercial policies and operations, and that all people should benefit equitably from our application of laws and regulations. And then we should focus on eliminating barriers such as poverty and lack of access, as well as working to address and repair systemic injustices. So when we talk about meaningful involvement, what we're really talking about is people having an opportunity to participate in decisions that affect their environment and or health. Decision makers will seek out and facilitate that involvement to make sure that those potentially affected have an opportunity to be involved. People's concerns are considered in the decision-making process, and that there's really an opportunity to influence state agency decisions. So I'm going to give you a little background on how we came to develop in our office the MiEJScreen tool. Back in 2018, the Environmental Justice Working Group, which was convened by the previous administration, really took a look at what the state could do to move forward with environmental justice post the issues in Flint around drinking water. And so that group came up with 33 recommendations. And one of the recommendations was the creation of an office similar to the Office of Environmental Justice Public Advocate. Another of the 33 was the development of some kind of environmental justice screening tool to be able to show what communities face on a broader scale. That, in addition to a report developed by several graduate students working with Dr. Paul Mohai at the University of Michigan and commissioned for the Michigan Environmental Justice Coalition, developed assessing the state of Michigan, a state of environmental justice in Michigan. So what they saw a screening tool looking like potentially for the state. And then looking at, you know, how we can incorporate that into development of a tool moving forward. Our office prioritized, along with the environmental justice response team, you know, the development of a tool. So for the last 2 years, between our research and development work group and work within the office and within EGLE, the tool has been in development and really looking at lots of different research. We pull that together, so reviewing existing tools that other states were using, looking at what was available on the federal level, and then collaboration with varying state departments, as I mentioned, through the working group, and then also stakeholder involvement. They were all part of the process of getting us where we are today. So the purpose of the tool is really to develop something Michigan specific, a Michigan specific mapping tool that can really assess cumulative factors like environmental, socioeconomic, and health that communities are facing in Michigan, and then really help inform decisions, allocate resources, and address community-specific issues and concerns. And really something that could be used by community members or industry, by local government, by state government, and help inform what communities face. So we all are looking at a common platform as we have discussions around how to move things forward. So I'm going to hand things off to Katie Lambeth, and she's going to talk a little bit more about the methodology and the way the screening tool works. So Katie, take it away.
Great, thank you, Regina. So I'm Katie Lambeth, EGLE's Environmental Justice and Tribal Liaison, and I'll mainly be talking about the methodology, scoring, and indicators used in MiEJScreen. And I'm going to apologize in advance if some of this is a little bit technical. But if you do want more in-depth information on any of this, you can refer to our draft MiEJScreen technical report. The methodology used for MiEJScreen is based on California's CalEnviroScreen, which is a screening tool that evaluates the burden of pollution from multiple sources while accounting for potential vulnerability to the adverse effects of pollution. So there are two sides to the equation, the pollution burden and the vulnerability. Similar to CalEnviroScreen, MiEJScreen is based on potential exposures to pollutants, environmental conditions, socioeconomic factors, and the prevalence of certain health conditions to produce scores for every census tract in the state. In the next slide, I'll talk about what a census tract is and why we chose to use census tracts. The scores are mapped so that different communities can be compared. An area with a high score is one that experiences more impacts than areas with low scores. We use percentile ranking in order to compare scores for each census tract, which I'll talk about in a couple of slides. MiEJScreen ranks communities based on data that are available from state and federal sources, and the indicators selected were based on the availability of national or statewide data that could be incorporated into the tool at the appropriate geographic scale. So here we're using census tracts. Therefore, we were limited in the data that we can include in the tool, and we recognize that MiEJScreen doesn't include every environmental or health impact that communities are facing. Census tracts are small, relatively permanent subdivisions of a county designated by the United States Census Bureau. Census tract boundaries are determined with the goal of being maintained over a long time, so statistical comparisons can be made over time. Therefore, data is often readily available at this geographic scale. Census tracts range in size, but have an average population of 4,000 people. Census tracts are used to represent the location of communities across Michigan. And in Michigan, there are 2,767 census tracts. And as you can see in this image, because census tracts are population-based, the areas range in size. As I mentioned previously, for the MiEJScreen overall score, each census tract is given a percentile rank based on how the overall score for the census tract compares to other census tracts in Michigan. This image shows how the overall score is displayed on the map. Each of these color bins represents 10% of census tracts, with the 90th to 100th percentiles being the highest scores and the 0 to 10th percentiles being the lowest scores. As I mentioned previously, Michigan has 2,767 census tracts, so each color bin represents approximately 276 tracts. So as an example, you can see here with this highlighted census tract that the overall score falls within the 25th percentile, which is represented on the map in the blue shaded color bin for the 20th to 30th percentiles. When comparing this census tract to the rest of the state, 75% of census tracts in Michigan have a higher score, while 24% have a lower score. So now I'm going to talk about how the overall score is calculated. The overall score is made up of two subscores, the environmental conditions and the population characteristics. These two subscores are further divided into 4 categories. There's 2 categories representing environmental conditions, the environmental exposure, environmental effects category, and 2 categories representing population characteristics, sensitive populations and socioeconomic factors. Each of these categories has a set of indicators, which I'll talk a little bit about in a few minutes. And an indicator is a measurement of either environmental conditions representing pollution burden or health or vulnerability factors for population characteristics. The individual indicators are scored for each census tract by its raw value, then assigned percentiles based on rank order. Those percentile scores are averaged for each of the 4 categories. So here, environmental exposures, environmental effects, sensitive populations, and socioeconomic factors. And to generate the subscores, the average percentile scores for the respective categories were added together and averaged. Please note the environmental effects indicators were weighed half the environmental exposure indicators because they only represent potential exposure. The overall MiEJScreen score is calculated by multiplying the subscores. Census tracts are then ordered from highest to lowest based on their overall score. A percentile for the overall score is then calculated from those ordered values. As I showed you in the previous slide, the tool maps the cumulative overall MiEJScreen score for every census tract in percentile rank. The user can also see the subscores, the category scores, and each of the 26 individual indicator scores and percentiles using the tool. And John will show you a little bit about that when he goes through the tool demonstration. So I'm not going to go super in depth on the indicators. As I said previously, you can find a lot more information on the methodology used and the reasoning for using these indicators in the draft technical report. The exposure indicators are based on measurements of different types of pollution that people may come into contact with. Most of these are air quality related issues, and the majority of these indicators come directly from EPA's MiEJScreen. Environmental effect indicators generally show proximity to known or potential contamination sites. Many of these indicators are sites regulated by EGLE, as well as information from EPA's MiEJScreen. Sensitive population indicators refer to human populations that experience increased vulnerability to environmental health risk factors such as pollution. Pollution has not only likely contributed to the generation of such conditions, but has also been found to worsen them. All the data for indicators in this category were prepared by the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, except the life expectancy indicator, which came from a national data set. Socioeconomic factor indicators are conditions that may make people more sensitive to pollution's effects. The susceptibility of communities of color and low-income populations to various environmental conditions has been reaffirmed many times through research. All of these indicators come from the United States Census Bureau's American Community Survey 5-year estimate from 2015 to 2019. The tool also has additional layers that help put the MiEJScreen layers into context. This isn't an entire list of the context layers, but it gives you an idea of the type of information that's included. The context layers with an asterisk are used in calculating some of the environmental effect indicators. For example, the sites of environmental contamination, part 201, were used to calculate the proximity to cleanup sites indicator. We also have additional environmental justice layers, such as the homeowner's loan corporation neighborhood redlining grade maps. This information is important for us understanding how past policies and practices have contributed to current situations. These maps, created during the Great Depression, developed a neighborhood ranking system known today as redlining that banks use to determine eligibility for mortgages. This practice formalized racial housing discrimination, as communities of color were often deemed to be hazardous or declining in areas where banks refused to offer loans. This not only produced segregation based on race in American cities, but also contribute to the racial wealth gap. We also have some climate indicators, including urban heat islands and percent tree canopy, as well as other EJ layers such as food desert and non-attainment areas. We also included several geographic features such as tribal lands and counties, as well as locations of schools and hospitals. If you're interested in additional information on how to use the tool and more detailed information about the methodology and the indicators used in the tool, please refer to these supporting documents. The fact sheet is a short document that provides an overview of MiEJScreen. The user guide provides information on how to use the tool and its various functions. And the draft technical report details the development of the tool, including purposes and intended uses, limitations of the tool, as well as the data and methods used to develop it. So as Jennifer mentioned, we are accepting comments on the draft tool and the supporting documents through May 16th, 2022. You can submit comments in a variety of ways, and I won't read through all these because I don't think we have anyone on the phone, but just know that you can submit comments in writing, through email, and we also have a voicemail set up, as well as this opportunity tonight. You can go to the MiEJScreen landing page to find lots of information, including the recordings of our informational webinar and screening tool demonstration sessions that we conducted on March 29th. And the recordings for today's sessions will also be included there. We also have an additional opportunity, as Jennifer mentioned, for office hour on May 2nd. That's just an opportunity to talk and ask questions specifically on the tool's function and how to use it. And then, as I mentioned, a lot of our supporting document, or all of our supporting documents and access to the tool is on that page. And the easiest way to get there is to go to michigan.gov/environmental justice, and then click on the Michigan Environmental Justice Screening Tool link under About Environmental Justice. Now I will turn it over to John Esch to introduce himself and begin the tool demonstration.
Hi, this will be a short demonstration of the MiEJScreen tool. Can you guys see my screen?
Yep, looks like you're on Google. Is that where you want to be?
Yep.
All right, perfect.
So one way is, another way is I use it's just it's go to Google Chrome or Google, it's type MiEJScreen, and the top link will bring you to the Office of an Environmental Justice Advocate. And if you click down here, the general information about environmental justice in Michigan, and this link down here will bring up the tool's main page, which is this page here. Okay. From this page, there's links to the overall MiEJScreen web app and executive summary version. I'll show those in just a minute. Here's those documents that Katie just mentioned, the fact sheet, the technical report, and the user's guide, also the scoring matrix. and more information as far as how to provide comments and when to provide comments. Further down, more on the model that was used. And at the bottom, here's all the indicators, just a brief discussion and description of each one of the indicators. So if you go up here, I'll first show you the executive summary, which is this. So this is a single layer overall score of the MiEJScreen. It's pretty basic. We have a legend over here. You can search by an address. You can pan and zoom. You can search by county. You can change the background map. You can print out a map. There's a number of things you can do from here. But for a lot of folks, maybe this is all they need. So for instance, I'm just going to click on this rural tract right here. So this is called the pop-up. So in this case, this census tract, it scores in the 6th percentile, which is fairly low. If I click on another census tract down here by Detroit, this census tract scores in the 80th percentile. And this is showing the 2 subscores in bold, the environmental conditions at 81st percentile and the population characteristics. It's also showing the 4 categories. We'll show you more about that in just a minute. It also shows you some, just some simple demographic information about how many people are in the census tract, population density, median income, but also unemployment rate. And this is a graph that just shows you those four categories. But if we click on this little thing, it'll show you the kind of a race and ethnicity profile for each one of the census tracts. So this maybe all you need is just seeing the overall score. But if you need more detail, you want to dig down a little deeper, you can either go to the full version here, or click here to go to the full version, which is this. And so you can see this is a much more advanced application. It still has the overall score, but we have many more tools and widgets. I may use the tool and widget interchangeably. We have a much longer layer list. We have a context layer list. And some other tools. I'll show you those in just a minute. So there's many ways to navigate. You can either just pan and zoom. Again, you type an address, a place, or a census tract number. You can use the old school zoom in, zoom out, or type in an address. This tool, it's just a bookmarks tool. It zooms to the major cities in the state, just for quick viewing. You can also create your own bookmarks. If you want to go to the full state scale, again, just click this icon here. This measure tool allows you to quickly measure an area or distance, or you can click on a point to get latitude, longitude if you want to populate another database. These other tools, I'll show you that towards the end. This is the reporting widget and also the side-by-side viewer. So don't be intimidated by this. Any of these widgets, you turn on, they toggle on and off. So you click it once, it'll turn it off. Click it again, I'll turn it back on again. Again, here's our layer list. We have the overall score. We've got the 2 subscores. And so any of the layers that you turn on the layer list shows up in the legend. We also got the 4 major categories: the exposure, environmental effects, the sensitive populations, and socioeconomic factors. Let me show you just a couple of these indicators. For instance, this is the low income indicator under socioeconomic factors. This is life expectancy. If we zoom in, Southeast Lower Michigan, again, this is using the same color scheme. So for instance, if I click on this census tract, its life expectancy is in the 97th percentile. So life expectancy in years is 69 years. If I click on one of these rural townships or census tracts, it's in the lowest 5th percentile. Life expectancy is 83. Again, we have the same demographic information and race and ethnicity profile. So that is it's the layer list. You can also change transparency by just dragging a slider bar. allows you to see information below the layer of interest. This is the contact layers list. So again, these are EJ related layers up here at the top, and geographic layers at the bottom. So a really useful layer is this redlining map or data set. We turn off the overall score so you can see this a little clearer, more clear. So this is the data that Katie mentioned from the Great Depression. If we zoom into a certain area, say Muskegon, Grand Rapids, look at turn on the overall score. If you click on one of these census tracts, we can see information about the redlining maps, description. You see the original maps from the 30s. We can also click on one of these forms to see the actual form from the 1930s. So again, these layers hopefully put the EJ data in context. Another layer we may be interested is the Justice 40 or the CGS data. This is displayed a little bit differently than how the CGS, the Justice 40 federal group is displaying it. We're just displaying it by number of thresholds exceeded. We can talk about that a little more later. This allows you to change the background map. So for instance, if I zoom into Saginaw Bay City area, look at that. I'm getting some information about Saginaw. I can change the background map to see buildings, roads, houses. I change the background map to a topographic map, streets, or default grayscale map. Let's say, for instance, I want to drill down even deeper. I'm going to turn on some of these background EJ layers. Let's turn on the Part 201 cleanup sites. We can run storage tank sites and Superfund sites. And let's go back here and turn off the overall score. Let's turn on the sites of environmental contamination. So what we're showing here is that this layer, proximity to cleanup sites, it's based on the proximity to all these other sublayers. The Part 201 sites, they can run storage tank sites, Superfund sites. So let's say I zoom in, got the map how you want it. What you do is you can print out a map. If I click this print button, it'll create a canned map of whatever layers you've got turned on. For instance, this is an example of what that map would look like. You'll save it to a PDF file and you can save it. You can change the name. Let's turn that off and zoom out. This tool, this is a glossary. So if you have so many indicators and context layers, and probably a lot of terms maybe people aren't familiar with. So this glossary will help them understand what some of these terms mean, but also have links to where some of the source data is for some of these. I just show you the print function. This is how to add data. So you can add external data to your map. So really briefly, I have a data of energy burden. So you can either add a web map feature service or map service or GIS file. I'm going to just drag this GIS down. This is a zipped shape file. So if you have your own external data, you can download your own data. What this is showing is these are census tracts where people are paying over 5% of their income on energy, electricity or gas or fuel. So just another nice context layer you can add yourself. So again, you can add other layers. We can show some other examples in the question and answer session later on. This is the filter button. I'm going to go back, turn on the overall score. Let's turn off the energy burden. Let's turn off these other context layers. So this filter tool allows you to filter any of these EJ layers above a certain percentile. So I want to see the overall score, just the upper 40% percentile. So percentiles over 60%. So just a nice way to kind of focus in on certain data sets. This tool here, it's a sharing tool widget. It allows you to share a map either on social media or send it to a colleague as email link. This tool here, it just gives you more information about the app and links to other resources like the web page, the fact sheet, the report, or user guide. And this widget, this is kind of a how-to. This tells you how to use certain of these tools, just the basic nuts and bolts. If you want to see a more detailed description of each one of these tools and how to use it, this is our user's guide. Much more detail on each one of the tools and step-by-step instructions on how to use them. Let me just show you a couple other of these more advanced tools. This is the side-by-side widget right here. So if I click on that, it brings up this tool. So it allows you to see any of the layers side by side, either the main EJ layers or any of the context layers. So in this case, I'm showing the overall score on the left panel. On this panel over here, we're showing the percent tree canopy, which is kind of a proxy for urban heat islands and climate change concerns. So as I zoom in anywhere in the state, the maps are in sync. It's really easy to change the layer. For instance, if I want to change this from percent tree canopy, I can change that to urban heat islands. So any of these layers, you can change it on the left panel or the right panel. One last important tool is the reporting widget. So let's turn off our filter. Let's get the overall score. Let's say I'm interested in a site, say in Lansing. And let's say the site is at this address. So click on this tool. I'm going to type in 525 West Allegan. I'm just going to select this really briefly. I'll show you that why I'm doing that in a second. And I want to do a 1.5 mile buffer around that point. Let me just zoom in here a little bit. Click report. So you see that there's 19 census tracts that are within that 1.5 mile buffer of that point. So I could go in here and click on each one of these, the overall score, each one of these categories, or I could create a report. Still pulling the data. So I click on this icon to print. So here is the report. Type in the buffer. So here is a canned report around that address, 1.5 mile buffer. This is showing the 19 census tracts, the overall score, sub-scores, some demographic information about each one of the census tracts. And then we start going into each one of the categories, each one of the indicators. So you can print this to a PDF and save it to a file or send it to a colleague. Now, just a brief overview of some of the functionality of MiEJScreen. Maybe we can go back to Katie, Regina, and Jennifer for questions.
Yeah, John, go ahead and leave this up. We did get one question in so far, and I think we're going to be getting some other ones. This one, we did get a similar question to this afternoon, and it's regarding rural environmental justice concerns, which is interesting. And this one is particularly related to the confined animal feeding operations, or the CAFOs again. So I know you had shared some stuff this afternoon about that. So I don't know if you could talk through that a little bit too. So maybe address how the tool is looking at EJ issues in rural areas, and then the information that we have on the confined animal feeding operations.
Okay.
While you're starting to pull that up, just to let folks know too, this question was also concerned with the impacts of PFAS contaminated sludge on farm fields and potential impacts to well water. So I don't know, we didn't talk about that earlier, so I didn't know if there was anything that you could share in regard to that as well.
So in our context layers, we do have all of our PFAS sites. So I think it's 208 sites. We don't have specific information to biosolids on farm fields. If you go to our MPART website, we have quite a bit of data and some reports on that, but the biosolids information is not within this app. One thing to talk about the rural versus urban areas. So this is a cumulative score. You know, this is taking all 26 indicators, and Katie showed you the math earlier, but you can see in large areas of northern Michigan and the UP, it's showing a fairly low overall score. But the thing is, if we turn off the overall score, if we turn on some of these other ones, for instance, the socioeconomic factors, you see areas in parts of the UP, North Michigan, where there's fairly high categories, or in some cases, certain indicators are fairly high. For instance, if we turn on low income population, you know, you can see it's fairly high in Northern Michigan. If we turn on unemployment, but also age over 64. And so in a way to try to, not sure why that's not showing up, in a way to try to capture some of those rural areas that may be high for a given indicator, what we've done is, if you go to the context layers, just take a little bit of explanation. So this is a layer of any of the indicators that are above the 75th percentile. And we just arbitrarily chose 75th percentile. We could have chose 70 or 60. We just chose 75 as a start. So any of these indicators that were above the 75th percentile, we added them up. So for instance, you can see like some of these tracts in northern Otsego County, none of the census tracts were above the 75th percentile. But the census tract here in Presque County, there's 6 of the census tracts that had 6 indicators that were above the 75th percentile. And so this hopefully is a way to get an idea of that some of the rural areas, there may be some census tracts that are fairly high in certain indicators, but they just don't rank high enough for the overall score. So I'm not sure if that answered your question, but hopefully that may assist in somebody looking at the overall score, but also turning on this layer to see what are some of the impacts in some of the rural areas.
John, can you show the example of the, maybe you were just getting to this, so sorry if I'm interrupting you, of adding the CAFO data that we do have?
Sure. So EGLE has done an amazing job the last couple of years of making data transparency. And so we have an open data GIS site. If I type EGLE data and maps. So for the people who use GIS a lot, this is a pretty amazing website. Many of our main apps here, but also data sets, story maps. This is kind of one-stop shop. I'm just going to type in for data, I'm going to type in CAFO. So you can, there's also an app behind this, but here's I think the licensed CAFOs. So what I can do is I click this download icon. I'm going to download this as a shapefile. So this is a zipped shapefile. So let me move this over here. If I go back over here to this add data option, I'm just going to drag this zipped shapefile onto here. I can also browse to it. It's loading it right now. Sure why it's taking so long. Let me try that again. So maybe we could try to answer some more questions. My computer's running really slow right now, and I will try to.
Yeah, that's totally fine, John. Sometimes that happens with the GIS data. There's so much information and so much data in there that it does bog the system down sometimes. Sometimes it works great and other times it doesn't. So is it pulling up now? Did I blather long enough for it to work? It was magic. Okay, there you go.
Here's all. I think these are titled licensed CAFOs. If I click on any of these, I get attributes. I'm pretty sure there's also an app out there that that's more focused just on CAFOs, but it's just an example of how you can add external data to your MiEJScreen app. Probably important point to be made is that anything you add yourself, only you see that. That's not, nobody from the state of Michigan can see that, and that's not, this data is not part of any of these indicators.
So I think that answers the question a little bit, or at least kind of shows how the tool can be used and integrated other information to look at some of the things that the commenter had questions about. So appreciate you walking through that. Another good question came in, and this was interesting because I feel like I remember you talking about this a little bit. And the question was, so the first question is there preset views of like combinations of layers? And I don't think we have that where you can just choose like certain things besides what you're showing now is the, ones you can click on with the, sort of overall score and things like that. So am I right in remembering that we don't have necessarily combinations of data already pre-saved? Okay.
But let me show you one thing that you could do. We already showed you the side-by-side viewer, how you can see stuff side by side, but really briefly, what you can do is, if you want to kind of see what you just described is, let me turn on the traffic density, for instance. And we also turn on the diesel particulate matter. And so both these maps look very similar. So let me zoom into this area, Southeast Lower Michigan. What I can do is, on this diesel particulate matter one, I can change the transparency. And it's another way to kind of see how things potentially relate. So, I can drag the transparency on the upper layer, make it totally transparent, see the traffic density below, or I can slide this back to see these are particulate matter, totally opaque. So it's just kind of a way just to see if there may be relationships or not.
So let's say that I knew I wanted to use these two layers all the time. Like these were two that I was going to be using a lot going forward. Is there a way that I could save this set of layers for myself? Or could I share that set of layers with myself or with someone else so that they could kind of see what I'm looking for? Can you talk a little bit about that functionality if it's available?
Well, there isn't really an elegant way to do that, but what you could do is, if I exited out of this app, be careful here. So I'm just going to go back to open the app up again, and we'll get a message down here in the lower right. It'll say, do you want to open up the map to its previous extent? So right here it says, click to restore the map extent layers where you left off. So it is a way to kind of keep, kind of your zoom extent and also the layers you have turned on.
Could you use a bookmarking function for something like that or no?
Absolutely. So if I click up here, let's say I work for for Jackson County, and I do all my work in Jackson County. I can zoom into Jackson, create a bookmark, and call it Jackson. So then when you come back again, you can quickly zoom into Jackson County. So there's, with a lot of the stuff, there's multiple ways of doing it.
It's definitely one of those tools that you need to get in and sort of play around with it a little bit and see what works, what doesn't, you know, what are you looking at? What is it showing you? So another question came in and it says, when you rank by percentiles for different population groups, do you use percent distributions by census tract, or is it considered more on a per capita or density basis? So I don't know if that made sense or not.
So Katie can maybe just better than I can, but kind of in a broad sense, there's 2,767 census tracts in the state, and so we're on the percentile basis. Each one of these color bins is 276 census tracts, and so it's really looking at this data set in these 10 kind of 10 chunks, each of these 10 percentiles. That probably didn't answer the question very well.
I think part of the question too, they said, do you use percent distribution? So not all of the indicators are using measuring by percent. I think the majority, if not all of the socioeconomic data is measured in percent of, the people in that census tract that are whatever layer that you're looking at. Say if it's low income, it's the percent of people in that census tract that meet that threshold, but then we translate that to the percentile ranking. Some of the other indicators are based on raw scores. So for instance, for our proximity indicators, we did and this is getting a little bit more technical, but we did kind of a buffering system where there was a scoring based on how close that particular site was to the census tract. So that is not the raw score wouldn't be a percent there. And again, I don't know if this is, completely getting at that question, but that was the other thing that I noticed in that question was asking about percent. So some of the indicators are measured by percents, but then it's translated to the percentiles.
Right.
I think we can always dig deeper. It seems like we can dig deeper and dig deeper, which is kind of interesting and cool. So just to remind you guys, if you do want to ask a question verbally or make a comment verbally, you can raise your hand to do that. We're more than happy to have folks do that as well. I don't have any questions in the question box right now or any comments. So while folks are maybe thinking of a couple other things, just going to give you guys a little bit of a reminder of information that might be helpful. So number one, I think that Katie did mention this already, that it's going to be open, the comment period, until May 16th. So just keep that date in mind. You certainly don't have to make comments today. So I do have somebody with their hand up. So Annabelle, hold on one second, and I'm going to unmute you, and then you should be able to unmute yourself and then talk now. So if you can just introduce yourself, and then if you have a comment or question, go ahead whenever you're ready.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Jennifer. Thank you for the opportunity to provide public comment. My name is Annabelle Wilkinson, and I am the Environmental and Climate Justice Specialist at the City of Grand Rapids. And I was going to submit comments on behalf of the City of Grand Rapids Office of Sustainability. So overall, I think the Michigan MiEJScreen tool will be an important addition to the field by providing really easy to understand data on the environmental conditions and vulnerable populations. So thanks so much for all the great work that you all have done. I greatly appreciate the context layers in particular. I do have some feedback for consideration. So one population that may not be adequately covered are the unhoused. The socioeconomic factor of housing burden provides the assumption of housing and doesn't take into account the unhoused. I completely understand there may be some difficulties acquiring data on the unhoused population, but since a life lived outdoors is an inherent environmental justice issue with an increased environmental exposure, that was just something to note. And then some additional suggestions for inclusion would be adding to the context layers to account for critical service gaps. maybe electric or gas utility shutoffs and broadband gaps. I think the context layer named Michigan Water Affordability Assessment could serve instead of water shutoffs. But I mean, for environmental justice, all people in communities have the right to equal environmental protection under the law, the right to live, work, and play in communities that are safe, healthy, accessible, and gaps in critical services often diminish that right. So including kind of some critical service gaps could help inform policy and resource allocation decisions from an energy perspective. And the data for broadband gaps could be pulled from the EPA MiEJScreen tool. I'd also recommend the inclusion of an additional climate change indicator that is more specific to Michigan. I greatly appreciated the urban heat island context layer. However, as we know, across our state, extreme weather events consistently bring flooding. And while those with higher incomes may be able to pay to pump water out of their basement, those who aren't able to do so may develop damp conditions after a flood, and give mold ideal conditions to grow and spread, which could trigger allergies and respiratory system issues. So the inclusion of 100-year floodplain data, which again could be accessed in that EPA MiEJScreen, could be a useful layer for identifying vulnerable neighborhoods. And lastly, just providing the list of pollutants for the environmental effect indicator category of impaired water bodies into the technical report and glossary might just help improve some accessibility of information for users. And I can submit these comments in writing as well, but thank you so much for the opportunity to verbally summarize them here.
Yeah, no, thank you for providing that and being willing to chat with us. So we appreciate it. Regina, I know you had talked about earlier that you wanted to be able, since this is a comment period, but it's not regulatorily required. So we have the ability to respond, unlike some of our permitting actions. So I didn't know if you or Katie wanted to respond to Annabelle right now, or if you want to hold a response for later, that's also fine.
No, I thank you so much, Annabelle, for all of your input. And, you know, one of the things we've heard a lot about is the floodplain data and data around flooding and the increased flooding. And so that is something that not only you have, you know, brought to our attention or made a comment on, but it's something that we're going to look at exploring how to better include in the information, because we've heard a lot about it. We're still collecting comments, so please submit your comments in writing, you know, including some of the things you referenced to help us better figure out how to address that. I don't know, to your point about the unhoused, you know, you're right, that is a difficult data set to include, but you know, I appreciate that thought, because you're absolutely right in terms of the context there. I know we do have energy burden in here, but your point about the gaps and how that's assessed, we can definitely, you know, I don't know, Katie, if you have thoughts about that, but I think that's an interesting kind of twist on the information, and that might be something that we'd have to explore further, but I appreciate you sharing all of that.
Yeah, if there are particular data sources or data that are available that you think would be important for us to include, please share that. And I will say that, you know, since we've had this draft tool out, we've gotten, you know, we've gotten some outreach from folks, for instance, that are working on some climate stuff in terms of, you know, talking about how to include that in the scoring itself. Michigan Public Service Commission is also right now looking at collecting data on like broadband internet gaps, on shutoffs, that type of thing. So I think, you know, just having this tool out there is kind of spurring additional data gathering. So where we do have gaps now, you know, hopefully we can work with partners and look at, you know, data that we can start collecting and be able to include in the tool. And I think in addition, you know, the federal tools that are out there now in this environmental justice being a priority at that level, I think we're going to see more data, you know, being developed and coming through that, you know, as we update the tool, we can include as well.
Yep, thank you guys for commenting back on that. We do have a couple other people with their hands up. So Peg, you are next. I'm gonna just unmute you here and you should be able to unmute yourself and talk whenever you're ready.
So my chat is disabled. just
Nope,
so
you're
you know.
fine. So Peg, just
Okay.
use the question and answer, and I apologize, that's my fault. I usually turn that off in the beginning
Oh,
because
okay.
because Zoom doesn't track that very well, and we want your comments, we want to keep them so that we can look at them later. So if you want to type something in, you can use the Q&A box. Otherwise, if you feel comfortable just introducing yourself and asking
Okay.
questions or making a comment, go right ahead.
Okay, my name is Peg Clevenger. I live in Jackson County. And I wondered if any of the layer list includes power, energy, infrastructure, locations. And then I also agree that the broadband gaps in rural areas. I know the previous speaker was talking about Grand Rapids, but in rural areas, the broadband gaps are really critical to being able to, be involved in decision making. And then I also agree with the floodplain that needs to definitely be part of this, but I'm really, really happy with this. It's such a wonderful tool. So thank you.
Oh, thank you for your comment. John, do you have something that you could show to the first part of Peg's question there?
Well, I don't have much as far as energy infrastructure, but on the floodplains, I could just another example of how we could, well, my guess is so many people comment on this, we could add that as a context layers pretty easily. But in the meantime, let me add you a floodplain layer just as an example. So here's a map service of the FEMA floodplain data. Again, this would be, you can add it yourself, but I'm guessing more than likely you're Jackson County. We could add that as a context layer. One of the struggles with some of the floodplain data is not all counties are part of the FEMA flood insurance program. And so you'll see some counties in the state, there's essentially no map floodplains or maybe only the major river. So, but as far as the energy infrastructure, maybe be a little more specific, Peg, on that.
And Peg, you should still be able to unmute yourself and chat if you wanted to follow up with John.
Well,
on
I
something
was, okay, thank you. I was thinking of power plants, gas plants, solar fields, windmills. Sometimes they're positive, but sometimes they're negative in terms of how they affect residents. And I just wondered if any of that was located on the map.
We do have a layer of power plants. So let me turn off a couple layers to make it a little more clear. Turn off.
Also, the manure digesters that are coming into the state. That would be another part of infrastructure.
So here's the power plants, and this is overlaid on top of the, I think Annabelle mentioned impaired water bodies. We do have impaired water bodies is one of our indicators. So, but here's the power plants.
Do the different colors indicate anything on these, John?
Yeah, these are different types. Like,
Oh, okay. My eyes are not good enough to read those. So that might be helpful. I guess that it's at least part of it, right, Peg? So we've got a little bit there for you to at least look at. Always room for improvement.
Yes.
And I hear you on the digesters. Because I work with air quality a lot, we are getting a lot more of those applications in. So definitely that's glad you commented on that. We can take that under consideration as well. All right, I've got one other person that's got their hand up. So Dolores, I'm going to unmute you or let you unmute yourself to be able to talk whenever you want. So if you want to be able to just introduce yourself a second and then go ahead with your comment or question.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Sure can.
Okay, my name's Dolores Mueller. I work at Southeast Michigan Council of Governments, or SEMCOG. I work in the data analysis group as a GIS analyst. I help to run our EJ analysis for our transportation projects, or the TIP, or in the RTP. And my question is we do a lot of mapping of transportation projects, short-term, long-term. We do a pretty good job of figuring out how much money is allocated to those projects to see if certain, population groups, or what we call the EJ population groups, are the money is evenly distributed, and we calculate it on a per capita basis. So we do a pretty good job in terms of like money, infrastructure, benefiting equal or better to, say, minorities. But one thing that we don't check as much is the benefits of, actually, in the last 5 years, we have been checking added accessibility to different core services. So I was wondering if this tool, when you're taking a look at a lot of these environmental layers and also transportation projects, I see that you have traffic density being shown. Is this tool something that you were imagining to also look at transportation projects? Or is it something that was perhaps planned to look at in the future? I'm not sure if you had any feedback on that from, say, MDOT.
Well, I'm curious from the work that you described, how what you've got there at SEMCOG is used to inform your recommendations, or how are you using that data?
Sure. Two of the main population groups that we look at are minority populations, and then also low income populations. So if we look at that at a per capita basis, and then we take our transportation projects, we map them. This is just really simplifying it at a kind of like a high level. We would buffer it and try to figure out what area that transportation project is more likely to serve. And then we have money that's allocated to that project, and we can forecast that, short-term or long-term. And then we distribute that money that's planned to be spent on a per capita basis. And then you can compare with your per capita categorized into minority population versus low income, and the opposite out of those populations. We check to see that the minority population is benefiting from the dollar amount equal or more with the short-term projects, and then also forecasted into the future when we look at our regional transportation projects, like 30 years into the future. So we're checking to make sure that there's equity there. So I was just wondering, that's something that we do, and we do a separate environmental sensitivity analysis, which this seems to be a little bit more, the layers I'm used to seeing are similar to the ones that you show here. So I was just wondering if you had been talking with MDOT on whether this tool could be used for looking at that in terms of transportation projects.
Yeah, I mean, I think we don't, since this tool just came out, the uses of it are gonna expand over time. I don't think MDOT has specifically reached out on any specific projects on it, but like we mentioned, really early in the presentation, it's designed to be used by multiple stakeholders, not just, EGLE, but other state departments and other folks like your program if you're utilizing it for a specific purpose. So I think, as the tools out there, we're going to see more and more uses of it, and we're not really necessarily dictating how people are using it. We want folks to use it in whatever way makes sense for their projects.
And I'd add that if you have recommendations on a data set that would help in that process, to achieve equity in that way and to make sure that, populations are taken into account that should be in the process. We do have folks from, MDOT, I mentioned earlier about our interagency response team. They are part of that. And so please share with us in, during our comment period, your thoughts or recommendations on how it could be valuable in the process.
So, for example, would accessibility to parks be a layer that you might think would be included in this?
We do have the state and
Right.
federally owned lands, which, has a little bit of proxy to green space. But I don't know that we have like a access to data layer that includes like all of the parks and green space in the entire state that aren't necessarily state owned or federally owned. So if there is that information, for sure, share it with us.
Okay, well, we can suggest it. And then, if it's not something that the state decides to do at the state level, like you said, we can always drag it in and use it as our own data.
Yeah, I think that's an important part of this tool. There's a lot of data here. But there's not everything, right? So for specific purposes, the fact that you can overlay your data, your sites, all of those things onto this and still use it, to achieve what you're trying to achieve, I think is a really important aspect of the tool.
Is there some basic geoprocessing? I see measuring tools, but are there things like a selection within?
We don't have the selection tool, but as you know, Dolores, it sounds like you're a GIS person. We're using ArcGIS Online with Web App Builder. So the selection tool is one of the standard widgets that we could add.
Okay, great. Thanks. We'll think on that.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks a lot for your comments on that. I was going to just share a little tidbit about an interaction that I recently had with MDOT. They had an internal public participation sort of training for their staff, and using EPA's EJ screening tool was something that they did talk about. So I don't know to what extent. I only was able to participate in a little bit of it, but I think that is definitely something that they're considering, and I know with this team is going to be sharing suggestions like that with our other stakeholders. So that's definitely something that will be brought up. So again, just appreciate the comment on that. I want to give you guys just another minute. It's about 7:15. So we've got about 15 more minutes if folks want to stay on, if other people have questions or comments. While you think on that for a second, I was just going to share, you guys were making me think of last week. Speaking of broadband coverage, I was outside at night and I saw the Starlink satellites go by. Has anyone seen that? It was really crazy. I thought it was a UFO. I was like, looked at my friend and I was like, are you seeing what I'm seeing? Is there something weird in the sky that we've never seen before? Is it a lightsaber? What is it? It was really fascinating.
You just calmed my fears I've had. Because my daughter and I were driving back home and we were about to pull into the garage, and she said, look, and we looked up. She was like, what is it? Is it a UFO? And she started recording it. And then we were like, we should tell somebody.
Yeah, it was very, if you haven't seen it,
it was a little creepy.
It was very almost disconcerting, because then we watched it travel across the sky. Like sometimes at night, you can see the satellites and they just look like a tiny star moving. This did not look like that. So yeah. So it was anyway, interesting. I know that's a sidebar and maybe some of you don't care about that.
See, I got excited about that because
Well, when we're thinking about broadband coverage and we're hearing about that a lot in the news and we're seeing these different capabilities, it does give me hope that a lot of our more rural areas and even in some of our urban areas where we have lack of coverage, that there's possibilities that that is going to be focused on, like they've been saying it's going to. So anyways, I apologize for that sidebar conversation. Dolores, you are still unmuted. If you have another comment or question, go right ahead.
I have worked with the Connected Nation Michigan broadband data, and that's what we use at SEMCOG for our broadband availability and usage tool. It's an online tool that anyone could look at to kind of see the different categories that we show and the combination of information. But that would be one source that I can think of in terms of broadband. And it's actually something with the new Census 2020 data that's been released. We're going to be updating our tool with the ACS 5-year 2020 data and seeing if there's more up-to-date broadband availability data.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And thank you for bringing that up. If you don't mind, I might reach out to you outside of this, just because a lot of times when we're doing public meetings, that is something we talk about. We hear sort of anecdotal information, but it would be great to get a little bit of a tutorial on how to really look at that and see what kind of information it's giving you. And if it would be helpful for some of our decision making, that could be really, that could be helpful if you don't mind.
Oh, sure. Feel free to, we have a meeting, I think it's every quarter, if not monthly, about broadband. I think there's a task force, but if you do just search on SEMCOG broadband, it will come up as like either the top link, the map, the interactive map, or one of the top 3 links.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you very much for sharing that.
Yep, it pops up with an about box that describes the sources of data and how to use the tool.
Very good.
I think there's a video too.
I know you guys are really good at outreach over there, so I should have assumed that there was, for sure.
Thank you. All
right. So I'll give you guys just another second here to think about any other questions or comments that you might have. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen over John's just to go over a couple of those things that we had talked about previously. Things that I know we've already said tonight, but I just want to remind folks, just on the screen right now is where you can send those comments. Don't, feel bashful about using that voicemail at 517-284-1400 to leave comments. That's perfectly fine. We take them any way we can get them. You can also contact us at the EGLE-environmentaljustice@michigan.gov email address, or give a call to 517, sorry about that, advanced on accident, 249-0906 if you have other questions that you want to ask outside of what we're talking about tonight. So I'm going to thank you, and then I'm going to pass it over to Regina to take us out of the evening tonight. So Regina, this is our last real presentation, Q&A, comment session. Like Katie had said earlier, on Monday the 2nd, that's Monday, right? Is that Monday? Wow, it's just crazy. It's gonna be May. Monday the 2nd, we have one more office hour. So if you go back and poke around, you still have questions for John or Katie, feel free to join us for that as well. But besides that, Regina, you want to take us out? I mean, this kind of feels celebratory, even though it's not May 16th yet, but.
Well, I really appreciate those of you who joined us this evening. Please share with us your comments in writing. We really thank you for your input. Our goal is to make this tool as useful in our work to achieve environmental justice as it can be for as many stakeholders. And so we're really counting on folks to give us thoughts and ideas about how to make it even better. So thank you so much. I know it is evening time, although chilly, sunny, at least where I am. So hopefully you all will have a great evening, and please feel free to reach out if you have additional questions. So thanks for joining us.